So I was thinking a lot of times I remember things from my past, but not really well. So I just thought I'd start with somebody who really remembers, you know. I remember the day of my conception. I went to this picnic with my father and came home with my mother. You need a little of this. I kind of humor to lighten all this seriousness. So tonight I wanted to guess where this talk has sort of been proverbial, because it's something almost in the second I've always talked about, because I feel it's so important, more as a cultural reference from what I learned in Asia and what is true about Western, what are kind of some of our cultural conditioning. It was interesting that in '91 we had a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, and there were three kind of things that came up that were kind of surprising to him, and actually one of them was mentioned today. And the three were, first of all, the explanation that somehow, as Westerners, that we have this truth that there's kind of this original wounding we have of, you know, for them they're native people, and they have a sense of what is it? It's really that to grow up it's good enough. You're loved because you are. You know, and for a lot of Western culture was that you know, to learn to be loved, that we had to somehow be something. You know, we had to be potty trained, or there was some kind of doing in that. There was just essential. And therefore there was this, you know, this kind of original wounding that we held of essentially not, you know, of not being enough, of not, probably good enough, just not enough. And it was a little complicated for His Holiness to get that somehow we didn't have it, because they come with the idea that they have Buddha nature, that there is this basic goodness that is inherent. And so it's kind of a big deal. The second piece was that was brought up, and these were a group of teachers and psychologists and psychiatrists and at this conference and kind of teaching. And the second piece was about that we not only did we have self-esteem problems about who we were, that also that we didn't really understand the body. You know, that somehow there was also a part of that, there was a dissociation that happened along with that in very young age. And we disassociated. And of course the third one was about, which they also had some problem with, was the whole idea around the feminine. That somehow these teachings were held somewhat exclusively by a male lineage, you know. So these were three things that, this was in '91, that came up, that really, in a sense, we've had to look at over the years. And one of the principal pieces for me has been the fact that we are, there's a dissociative piece, and I guess for me it's been such a pivotal thing of my own learning of how this practice works and how important it is actually to teach about the body as a fundamental in a culture that, you know, if we go back even in our own kind of religious history, one of the things before I went to India in the 60s, I've told this story for years. But, you know, when I grew up in Europe, in Switzerland, and kind of went to boarding schools, and I was sent there when I was about 6 or something like that, and I had already had a lot of problems by then. I had been diagnosed as autistic. So I was actually in the University of Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, as an autistic child. And probably I had some trauma that was actually what was going on. But anyway, and I think I learned a lot for a year. I didn't speak for a year. And so in some ways there was a traumatic piece about that. And there was also, I always joke, that it was my first long silent retreat. You know. And but they also then when I really I remember I was living in Paris, and I had this you know, and I kind of wanted to be a beatnik or something like that, you know, and this was in the mid-60s, and I didn't really make it, but that was okay. I had a good time. But somewhat, I mean, there were also difficult pieces, but it's where I first learned that, there was meditation practice. And I learned about, actually the first book I read was on concentration. And so there was this staring at the candle routine, you know. But it was all very dissociative, you know, in the sense of meditation for me, which also came out of my culture, that somehow, you know, there was something out there or up there or something that if I could just get out of this, I'd be okay, right? That was the fundamental teachings. You know, if I could transcend the world, you know, and that somehow the body was bad, that all of the teachings were really based on that I understood, you know. And so, you know, if I could fast long enough, or I could, whatever it took to get out of this. So while I was in Paris, I met someone, Robin, he wrote for Ramparts magazine, and was very kind of instrumental as we've had people who've turned us on as we've gone along, you know, those people that somehow have and so he turned me on to, he had been in school in Guadalajara, Mexico, and his father was president of the Bank of America in San Francisco or something, and he said, you know, there's this scene going on in San Francisco. And I went, oh, you're kidding, really? You know, this is better than Paris, you know. And so he had, you know, back when they had these albums, and there was Grace Slick, you know, and had this album and some, you know, some other stuff that kind of switched my mind around a little. And said, you know, I should take Translove Airways and get to San Francisco, which I did, you know. But what happened when I got there, I remember I went out to this was, they called them human beings, you know. And I went out and actually, this is a good story, actually, when I think about it. Pigpen of the Grateful Dead handed me the little handful of pills. I took the whole thing, of course. Which was not too intelligent. But, you know, it was a great day. The Grateful Dead were there, and this whole crew of great bands and stuff. And at the end of the day, you know, everybody sort of packed up and went home. And I was just like gone, you know. And you could have taken me anywhere at that point, you know. And so this lady said, well, why don't you get, let's see, the car is full, but you can get in the trunk. So I get in the trunk. Of course, she's totally stoned, and they drive.
What age were you?
About 19, something like that, you know. And they drive, out of the Panhandle to somewhere, around Haight Street, somewhere there. I don't remember where. I do actually remember, and then they get up and I'll leave the car, and I'm locked in the trunk, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm tripping out, and I'm going through this whole thing about, really, I don't want to be in this trunk. That's really what I don't want. But there I was on this substance that, I could just go out into the cosmos. So I'd go out in the cosmos, and then I'd come back, and I'd go, holy smoke, I'm in a trunk. And so I would go back and forth, where I would totally go out, and I go, oh man, this is like cool. And then I'd come back, and it totally, freaked me out. And I began to understand that the thing between the kind of being in your body, and my trouble was I was in a trunk, and, these other realms, and I thought, oh gosh, I really, of course I preferred to be in the other realms, but I was in the trunk, and eventually sometime, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, somebody came by, and I don't know, they were probably drunk or something, and I pounded on this trunk, and this guy came up, and it was one of those old cars where you could actually push a button and the thing popped up, and I stumbled out, and I took off, and one of the things I've never told this is on tape, this is not so good, but anyway. There was one of the things that Pigpen, the Grateful Dead, that Owsley had made, besides his White Lightning that was in this, was this other stuff, and it kept you stoned for about 3 days. And there I was, I didn't know up from down, and I was going through this whole dissociative process, which I'd actually been in most of my life, by the way. And it was really about, well, one thing I knew I didn't want to do was be in a building, and it was the beginning of this summer of love, and so I went and I lived in the park under a bush a lot of that summer, and I was very going into a building was just so uncomfortable for me, and I didn't want to be there, So I it really began a process of looking at, and I wanted to get out, and that was had been kind of my incentive in the first place, that I was seeking, but I didn't understand what it was about, and all I wanted to do was to get out. And in some ways, then I started reading some Buddhism. It also said about talk enlightenment, about getting out. And I went, oh man, this is for me, So it didn't take me too long. It took me probably, from then, year and a half, 2 years. And I really didn't know California, so I hitchhiked around and lived in different communes and and in the meantime, my best friend that I'd come for had committed suicide. That when I first got here, within a month, and then about 3 months after that, my mother was killed in Italy in a car accident. And so suddenly I had all this world that was kind of crumbling around me, and I realized that all of it was, it was just like a set of cards just falling. And at that point, and then there was also, I was also caught in the system then was, and anybody who, I know veterans here, that I decided, okay, I had to get out of the US, And so I ended up going to Europe and hitchhiking through Europe, and then taking public transportation to Asia, where I spent over 10 years. There was a lot involved in the fact that the first learning for me was the fact of somehow that I could get out of this. And that I remember I don't know how long, maybe I'd been in Asia 6 months or something like that, and I was studying with these Tibetans, and my teacher at the time, this Lama Thupten Yeshi, we went up on this hill. It was the astrologer's house, which now is a large monastery in Kathmandu called Kopan. And we were up there and we were looking down over the valley. And we were talking, and he said, you have it wrong. You somehow think that that this whole process is to get out of here. And he said, no, and he turned and he pointed and he said, you have to go through this, But I had no understanding what he meant by that. And later that year, I went up to Everest Base Camp and up to this monastery, actually, that Lama Zopa had up there near Everest. And one of the things he had said to me, he'd give me this mantra to repeat, and the other one he said, just keep your mind in your feet. Keep my mind in my feet? Okay, in my feet, So, and it was a long walk. I walked for 2 months that year, up into the Himalayas, and it was kind of like there was this shedding, Sometimes I'd walk, and I remember the first day I just cried, because I realized everything that I was suddenly, at that time, in those years, there were not a lot of Westerners. And I actually, that year when I was up there, I met Sir Edward Hillary. That's pretty cool. I met the man who skied down Everest, and I spent 9 days with him. He was really cool. He was the most samurai Japanese guy. I mean, he was really cool. But a lot of this, just walking by myself, and I found the first day I realized I couldn't carry this pack. It was too heavy for me. And so there was a young Sherpa coming down the mountains. Boy, I'm really getting into the story, huh? And as he was coming down, what I didn't know was he didn't speak any Nepali. I didn't speak any Nepali. So suddenly, and he was coming down he wanted to be a porter, and that was the thing, his job. He was probably 17, maybe 16, 17. And so we began this whole process of sign language and kind of teaching each other. And I have to say this is another piece. I got him to take his first bath. Bath. He came from a town called Pamboche. And Pamboche is, from Tamboche you go up, and Pamboche it's like one of the highest villages in the world. So they actually use mustard oil on their skin, and that's really what keeps them, like the water is just too cold, right? So low altitude, he didn't know what, he was sweating, and he had all these heavy clothes on and everything. And so we went into this river, and it was kind of, I realized it was a big deal for him, just coming out. And then this white guy, kid, with this long hair and beard and wearing these kind of Tibetan robes and stuff, it must have been very bizarre, But probably to him, not as bizarre as it was to any of you if you have met me then. So I want to get around to the teachings themselves, because really they are so fundamental, that somehow the whole thing of, bringing my attention, teaching myself, first of all, that Buddhism was not a practice of disembodiment, that the Buddha had spent 6 years doing austerities. And in those 6 years, he had learned all these practices of transcendence. And he realized that wasn't the answer, And really at that point, that's where he turns around. And interesting in the story is that the 5 ascetics he was with, who were his friends, figured as soon as he started then eating and acting normally, and by then he was pretty emaciated at that time, and they turned away from him and actually left and said, he's a traitor to our tradition. So the man was a fundamental rebel, and he went and he sat. What we know is he went and he sat under the bo tree. And when he went there, he made the resolve that he was going to sit down and he was going to get this, get it in a way that, in a sense, you could use the word non-returning, that he did not want to return. And that was his resolve, was not to return. And his awakening, to look at it from the point of view of that he made the resolve not to move was, and sort of the story of kind of what they call the armies, the 10 armies of Mara came, and dancing maidens and armies, and all of it came to allure him and pull him away from this determination to see through this conditioning, And he did, And one of the things, there are certain things about it that may be somewhat mystical in some ways and questionable from our point of view, like the second watch that he was able to go back through lives. Now we don't know all of the history. All we know is that then he began to own what is pretty much, in a classical sense, a new culture that was not disembodied, but was actually a practice of owning where you are and how you are, and embodying the very essence or the very gift of being born and living in the body. In the body, This is there are several quotes here that probably be good. In this fathom-long body, this is the Buddha, is found all of the teachings. In this fathom-long body are found all of the teachings. Is found suffering, the cause of suffering, and the end of suffering. Okay? There it is. In a simple, concise way. The fundamentals of these practices are that somehow we have to, in a sense, turn the mind around. And when we turn the mind around, we have to kind of own. We have to own, this afternoon when I did the forgiveness practice, we have to own our whole history of who we are, how we are, these bodies that we live in. And this is not a practice of just kind of cutting. I think part of my practice and part of my going to Asia was that I could cut off, burn all my bridges, and then I would be out of it. That was the fundamental belief, and there was a lot of support for that, in kind of Western theological, truths. But what we're talking about here is somehow when we turn around, and the practice is that first he said, okay, we're going to make it really simple here. The first foundation of mindfulness in the fundamental teachings in the Satipatthana are the fact that you put your attention, he said, first breath. The breath is part of what? The body. And so there was a way that we were starting to feel, and it's interesting because the breath in some ways, it has the dimensions We can transcend it, but we can, and it also is a doorway through to other states. But it also is, in essence, has the rhythms. When you become afraid, where's your breath? It's way up. When you're really relaxed, where's your breath? Really low. So it actually reflects that somehow this is a gestalt. And we have to learn to use what we have, to begin to translate or understand our mechanism of this human experience, and not to transcend it, but actually start to, in a sense, maybe this is just knowing it and befriending it. This is from Tsongkhapa, one of the 14th century. He was, I was thinking of like, even the Quakers. I mean, there's been this whole process of visionaries who have come along. And in this particular case, he is the kind of father of the Dalai Lama's sect, the Yellow Hat sect, and was a great yogi. And so I'll just read this from Tsongkhapa. The human body, at peace with itself, is more precious than the rarest gem. Cherish your body. It is yours this one time only. The human form is one with great difficulty. It is easy to lose. All worldly things are brief, like lightning in the sky. This life you must know as a tiny splash of a raindrop, a thing of beauty that disappears even as it comes into its being. Therefore, set your goal. Make use of every day and night to achieve it. So, this preciousness, that, it is a, in some of the texts they talk about, now this, I know this is Buddhist stuff, okay. But it talks about a blind turtle. And that blind turtle comes up once every 100 years. And there's like an intertube out in the ocean. And that turtle, blind turtle, has to come up and go through that inner tube. And that's how rare it is to be born as a human being. Just a bit of understanding of, as we understand kind of everything from neuroscience to more of the cosmos and the size of it, and, it's something that's still in the sense of growing in some way. And that the internal truth of your function, how miraculous is this? We talk about, we use the scene, in a sense, to begin to understand the unseen. And a lot of it is just so when we turn our minds and begin to experience our bodies. What do you experience when you put your mind in your body? It's simply points in space. We have words like, I don't know, liver, lungs, we know all these things, and that's cool. But how do you experience them? They're experienced as simply they are the elements in play. So it is the microcosm of the whole macrocosm. And we turn the mind around and we begin to study an operational system that's only experienced. There's that of words and areas and all that. But actually what you're experiencing is the qualities of air, earth, water, and fire, and space. and that we began to understand or experience them as certain vibrations, as certain energetic fields, as heaviness and lightness, as the earth element, as a sense of fluidity or cohesion as the water element. We get the experience of, we get hot or hot flashes or some, or heat or something, or cold, and that's the fire element. And we have the air element, which we experience what? As kind of tingling and vibration in the body. So all of this is, so we're turning the mind around and we're beginning to actually study the function of this whole miraculous process here, This is from Hankon Zenji. All beings by nature are Buddhas, as ice by nature is water. How sad people ignore the near in search for truth afar, like someone in the midst of water crying out for thirst. Truly, is there anything missing now? Nirvana is right here before our eyes. This very place is the pure lotus land. This very body, the Buddha. So, and this is Kabir. I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. You don't grasp the fact that that which is most of life is inside your own house. So you walk from one holy city to the next with a confused look. Kabir will tell you the truth. Go wherever you like, to Calcutta or Tibet. If you can't find where your soul is hidden, for you, the world will never be real. So one of the things that's been a challenge for me, and I suspect for you, is the practice of actually bringing the mind, training the mind to actually be in the body and to feel it and stay in it. In the Satipatthana they say that the first, the places where we lose it, which I mentioned I think right at the beginning, is the transitions. Standing, sitting, lying, or walking. That in the transitions, you get up and you go, oh, I'm really right here, I'm all here. And then you go, oh, the bell rings, and you get up and you walk out, and you don't remember yourself until you're out the door. You go, oh, wow, oh, here I am. And our practice here, and that's okay, that's just the way it is, this is part of how it is. But more and more, and I can say the training here is getting the fact that you can inhabit this. And if you can inhabit this, and that means it's one of the things I've learned that over the years has been that if I can keep part of my attention, 10-15% of my attention in my body, what am I actually aware of? Is it for the body's sake? No, it's not. That's not the point. The point is that what I'm touching, one is the mind. Our thoughts and our ideas and stuff, you understand it's part of the disembodiment. They actually can go anywhere. And those can become beliefs and concepts which are solid and real. Okay? And the idea here is that we want to have insight into the actual nature of things, how things work. And to do that, we have to have some bit of awareness that we're in a flow called time. And that flow in time, that the mind itself is constantly It's constantly checking everything out to actually construct a world that it feels safe in. That's what your mind does. That's kind of its job, you know. And part of that is its need for safety is it solidifies things, either in beliefs or in its contact with things. You know. The idea here is that to put the attention, just for a moment, to put it in your body, is actually to put it into, you can never put the same mind in the same body. Yet, you know, it's just not possible. That there is a, you know, this is actually a river, a flow of information that is constantly in flux, in change. Between your lymph system, your blood system, your breathing, all of this is a living system that is constantly telling the truth about things. You know, it's telling you that this is an impermanent process, you know, that has no more validity than the moment itself. You're just in a flow, in a flux. And so no matter what you believe or what you make up, you know, it's all transient. It's all, you know, we cause wars out of the belief systems, all sorts of things that happen, or out of our need for this or that or safety or whatever. And the idea is here, no, let's just own a little piece. And it doesn't have to be a big piece. It's just that you have to be aware of the phenomena, you know, and that it means that there's some constant kind of checking into it. This is an old piece I've read sometimes years ago, but it's from Deepak Chopra from Noetic Science Review. Something is obviously wrong with our current model of the human body. The reality is that for your physical body is not a frozen anatomical structure, but literally a river of intelligence and information and energy that is constantly renewing itself every second of your existence. Just as you can't step into the same river twice because new water is always flowing in, the real you cannot step into the same flesh and bones twice. Every second of your existence, you are renewing your body more easily, more effortlessly, and more spontaneously than you can even change your clothes. And this, I know, is old information, but it's okay, you know. Various scientists have calculated that in less than 1 year, you replace 98% of all the atoms in your body. Making a new liver every 6 weeks, a new skeleton, which seems so hard and solid and permanent, every 3 months, a new stomach lining every 5 days, a new skin once a month. Even the brain cells you think with, as carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, weren't there 1 year ago. And the actual raw material of the DNA that holds memories of millions of years of evolutionary time comes and goes every 6 weeks. You know. Now, are you a miracle or what? You know, and so part of this is just getting that in some sense that, okay, here is this phenomenal process that I'm inhabiting for actually a very, as Tsongkhapa said, a very short amount of time, you know. And our idea here is that somehow instead of, you know, in a sense, the training here is instead of going to your head and your ideas, and I'm not saying those are great, it's wonderful, you know, and but we've also, you know, this is so old that in some ways, you know, the whole process now is the fact that we understand the neoplasticity of the brain, that actually we are retraining our brains here in a way that you have no idea. And we probably won't know for at least 20 years through our science at this point, you know, that there is something going on here that will spread, I think. And I think we're seeing that around and around, as people begin to understand that, oh, there is a mind training that can, in a sense, bring us some solace and peace, in the sense that fear lives in the mind, not in the heart. And I think that's a huge piece, you know. And so most of the things that happen is that we, particularly around fear, is that the Buddha said, I can address this. Because probably, you know, maybe he was saying 90% of our human experience based on fear is made up, you know. And so can we somehow come to terms with that? And can we find a way to, in a sense, kind of own our intelligence? Just think of this body. Okay, there's the brain, yes. But the brain is part of what? And we learn more and more that the emotions are not something that's in the mind, that it's actually part of the whole, this whole gestalt, this whole mind-body piece, including the memories, you know. And that our job here, in some ways, is to begin to access, we could actually say, millions of years of genetic intelligence that is available to us if we can, like, train the mind to make the connection, you know. And it has to be in a sense of wholeness, not in a sense of separateness. And that's our training on some level. This is from David White. Imagine my surprise, sitting a full hour in silence in irremediable fear of the world. To find the body, forgetting its own fear, the instant it opened and placed those unassuming hands on life's enduring pain. And the world for one moment closed its terrifying eyes in gratitude, saying, "This is my body. I am found." Isn't that great? No. This is my body. I am found. You know. So, a little bit about transcendence here, as far as the practice goes. And I always bring this up because I think ultimately, to me, kind of in my lineage, there was this teacher, Ajahn Mun. And Ajahn Mun was a forest monk in northern Thailand. And he was, in ways, if you go back 100 years, in the jungles, which were, those were all teak forests, so there's a huge canopy, and there wasn't so much sort of support in the monasteries at that time. There were these wonderful mendicants who lived out in the jungle, in the forest, and some had moved out of the known world, you know. And Ajahn Mun was known as one of these that they say he would appear for a little while in one place and he'd disappear and show up another place, but you could never really find, if you wanted to go look for him, you couldn't really find him, you know. And Ajahn Chah had been a monk for 20 years. And he spoke, he said it's kind of like, where it was, he described it as oil and water. And that the oil was the absolute, and that the water was the relative. Okay. And he said, oh, I had learned, I'd done my practice enough so I'd shaken it up, and it kind of, had mixed it up in the sense of the water and the oil. And so he had some understanding of it. But he said when he met Ajahn Mun, and he only met Ajahn Mun for 3 days, But in that exchange, Ajahn Chah said, my mind was turned. And so I was looking first from the relative at the absolute, and I had some understanding. He said, after I had kind of had this exchange with Ajahn Mun, he said, oh, my mind turned. And so then I was looking from the absolute at the relative, And if that makes sense to you, it's a huge piece, It's actually the turning the mind around. So no longer, we're so, in a sense, we live in this constructed world. In that constructed world we believe in, that this is solid and everything is, somehow, it's real, But when the mind turns around, it actually sees that this is not truly what it is, It's actually, you could say empty, I've used the term, empty of any inherentness. So there's no carpetness, or there's no wallness, or there's no Johnness. Those are not, they are actually it's not that they aren't. It's just that they aren't what they appear to be. And so the way a mind has to free itself is to actually turn itself around on itself. And therefore it no longer believes its beliefs and its constructions, and in a sense its observations, and that it suddenly it sits actually in a state of not knowing. And that it doesn't need more than that. And I'll just leave it at that. So, just to end here, I'll read this little piece from Ajahn Mun Buddhadatta. In your investigation of the world, never allow the mind to desert the body. So this is pretty important. In your investigation of the world, never allow the mind to desert the body. Examine its nature. See the elements that comprise it. See the impermanence, the suffering, the selflessness of the body, while sitting, standing, walking, or lying down. When its true nature is seen fully and lucidly by the heart, the wonders of the world will become clear. In this way, the purity of the mind can shine forth, timeless and delivered. I got to read that again. In this way, the purity of the mind can shine forth, timeless and delivered. So.
Timeless what, John?
Timeless and delivered.
Oh, okay.
So you got it all. You have it all. But as long as you're lost in what you're seeing, or what you're thinking, or what you're believing, then somehow, there is some delusion. And the idea here is to somehow get beyond your delusion and just see actually the bare bones, you could say, of things, the simplicity of how things are. And in that there is this timeless, delivered place. So that's my 2 cents worth. So let's just sit for a minute.